The chandeliers sparkled above the resort's grand ballroom, spilling golden light across marble floors polished to perfection. Waiters weaved through the sea of executives in pressed suits, their trays carrying glasses of champagne that clinked softly as deals were whispered and promises were made. It wasn't just another corporate event. It was the night of the year. The CEO herself, Victoria Hale, was hosting, and everyone knew that when she appeared, eyes followed and hearts skipped. Victoria stood near the stage, poised as ever in her tailored black dress, a woman carved out of confidence and precision. People often described her as cold, even ruthless, but tonight there was a sharp gleam of anticipation in her eyes. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement. Her company had just secured its biggest contract, and this night was meant to shine. Then, everything went dark, the chandelier stopped with a sharp crack, the music stopped mid-note, and a wave of startled gasps rose from the crowd. Within seconds, the ballroom, once radiant with light and laughter, was smothered in pitch-black silence. Someone dropped a glass, it shattered, its echo oddly loud against the hush that followed. Everyone, stay calm. Victoria's voice cut through the darkness. Strong, commanding, but with an edge of irritation that made her employees straighten their shoulders, even though they couldn't see her. She wasn't the type to tolerate failure, least of all in front of clients and investors. A few phones flickered on, screens glowing like fireflies, casting pale light on nervous faces. Murmurs began to ripple. The generator should have kicked in by now, why hasn't it? Victoria's jaw tightened. Her mind ran through the logistics. This resort was supposed to be prepared for any emergency. A simple outage shouldn't bring everything to a standstill. The backup generator, installed in the basement, was designed to restore power instantly. But clearly, something had gone wrong. She snapped her fingers at her senior assistant, who was fumbling with her phone flashlight. Find the head of maintenance. Now. Yes, Ms. Hale. The assistant scurried off, voice quivering as she spoke into her earpiece. But in that same moment, another voice rose from the shadows. A deep, steady voice that carried both calm and confidence. I can take a look at the generator. The crowd shifted, turning their phone lights toward the source. Standing near the far end of the hall was a man in worn jeans, and a work shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His hands were calloused, his boots scuffed from real labor, not the polished boardroom grind. His name was Daniel Ross, though most people only knew him as the guy who fixed things around here. Victoria's sharp eyes narrowed as the light fell on him. She remembered seeing him earlier that afternoon, tinkering with a broken air vent near the staff corridor. He wasn't one of her employees. He was an independent contractor the resin called when something big broke down. In other words, an outsider. And you are? She asked, her tone clipped, each word deliberate. Daniel. Maintenance contractor. He met her gaze evenly, unfazed by her presence. I've worked on this building before. If the generator isn't kicking in, it might need more than just a reset. The executives around her exchanged uneasy glances. An important event, top clients in attendance. The CEO's reputation hanging in the balance, and now a stranger was volunteering to handle the crisis. Victoria folded her arms, assessing him. She hated unpredictability, and this man was nothing but that. His shirt was clean but clearly old, his hair slightly tousled, his face carrying the exhaustion of someone who had seen too many long nights. And yet there was something in his steady tone. Something in the way he didn't shrink under her stare, that unsettled her usual certainty. You think you can do what their head of maintenance couldn't? She asked coolly. Daniel shrugged. I don't think I know. But it's your call. The silence stretched. All eyes were on her. Victoria's reputation was legendary, she never allowed anyone to question her authority. And yet here was this man. Standing tall, as if he had nothing to lose. Finally she tilted her head slightly. Very well. You'll have one chance. Daniel nodded once, already moving toward the service door that led to the basement. His steps were confident, though inside his chest, his heart thudded with the weight of urgency. His daughter, Emily, was upstairs in the staff lounge, waiting for him to finish his shift. He'd promised her they'd have dinner together after the event. The last thing he needed was to lose this job, especially with mouths to feed and bills piling up. Victoria's assistant returned then, breathless, whispering that the official maintenance team was still scrambling, unsure of the problem. The CEO's lips curved into the faintest frown. Inwardly, she admitted, though she'd never say it out loud, that perhaps this Daniel might be her only real hope tonight. As he disappeared into the stairwell, phone lights followed him briefly before fading back to the ballroom. The atmosphere buzzed with suspense. Guests whispered, the staff fidgeted, and Victoria stood still, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes fixed on the closed door through which Daniel had gone. In that heavy silence, one thought pressed itself into her mind. A thought she'd never have entertained under normal circumstances. If he pulls this off, I'll owe him something I've never given anyone before. The stairwell door creaked open, and Daniel reappeared in the ballroom, his shirt already streaked with dust, and a faint smear of grease across one hand. The soft glow from scattered phone screens lit his face. Determined and calm, though his hair clung to his forehead with sweat. The generator's not responding to the automatic switch, he announced, his voice cutting through the restless murmurs. It'll have to be started manually. I can fix it, but I'll need a few minutes and the right tools. The crowd shifted uneasily. Minutes felt like hours in the tense silence of that grand hall. Investors tapped their feet impatiently, employees whispered nervously, and the air itself seemed to press in heavier with each second of darkness. Victoria Hale stood at the center, arms crossed, her heels clicking against marble as she stepped closer to him. She was a woman who didn't bow to pressure. She applied it. And this stranger commanding attention in her carefully curated event, didn't sit well with her at all. She studied him in the glow of phone lights. His shirt clung to his frame, evidence of a man used to work, not comfort. His eyes carried wariness but not defeat, and more annoyingly, he wasn't intimidated by her silence, or her stare. You're very sure of yourself, Victoria said at last, her voice smooth as glass but with a razor's edge hidden beneath. Daniel didn't flinch. I've done this before. Her lips curved into a faint, almost mocking smile. Confidence is cheap. Results are not. The room stiffened, the employees closest to her lowered their eyes. They had seen this before. When Victoria questioned someone, it wasn't simply a question. It was a trial by fire. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag tucked in his pocket. I don't need speeches. Just permission to get the work done. Something about the calm certainty in his voice ignited a spark inside her. A strange mix of irritation and curiosity. She had built her empire on people proving themselves under pressure. She didn't believe in luck. She believed in tests. And right now, she wanted to test him. She stepped closer, so close that even in the dim light, the others could see the sharp confidence in her stance. Her words came suddenly, like a whip cracking through the air. Fine. Fix the generator. She paused deliberately, her next words dripping with daring. And if you do it, if you really can, you'll earn a kiss. Right here, in front of everyone. A collective gasp rippled across the ballroom. Someone dropped their champagne flute with a sharp clink. Even the staff froze in disbelief, their wide eyes darting between the CEO and the man she had just publicly challenged. Daniel blinked once, caught off guard. But not by the promise of the kiss. It was the sheer audacity of the challenge. She wasn't just daring him to fix a machine. She was daring him to prove his worth in front of her empire. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't need your kiss, Miss Hale. That his words sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. No one ever dismissed Victoria Hale, not like that. But, he added firmly, his voice steady, I'll fix it. Because I have a job to do. And because there's a little girl upstairs waiting for me. She's counting on me. For the first time, Victoria's confident mask flickered, ever so slightly. A little girl. She hadn't expected that. The executives shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other in the dark. Some smirked at the absurdity of the situation, others were secretly intrigued. Could this rugged, stubborn man really rise to the impossible? Victoria regained her composure instantly, her expression unreadable. So, it's settled, she said coldly, ignoring the protests of her assistant who tugged lightly at her sleeve. Fix the generator, prove yourself. Or fail, and walk away. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man who thrived on public spectacles. But he had lived his life under harsher spotlights than this. Nights of unpaid bills, days of explaining to his daughter why her birthday had to be simple. Mornings where he'd patch shoes with glue just to make them last. Compared to all that, this was nothing. He met Victoria's eyes. His voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who had nothing to lose but everything to fight for. Challenge accepted. With that, he turned and headed once more toward the stairwell, his steps steady despite the weight of dozens of eyes on his back. Behind him, the ballroom erupted in hushed voices, a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and scandalized laughter. And at the center of it all, Victoria Hale stood still, arms folded, her expression perfectly composed, yet inside, for reasons she couldn't explain, her pulse had quickened. This wasn't about the generator anymore. It was about him. The stairwell was narrow and steep, the kind of place most executives had never set foot in. Dust coated the railings, and the faint smell of oil and iron grew stronger with each step down. Daniel moved quickly, flashlight in hand, while behind him came the echo of heels and polished shoes. Victoria had followed. So had half a dozen of her senior executives. Daniel didn't turn, but he felt the weight of their presence. Their expensive suits and disbelieving eyes didn't belong in this dim corridor, but here they were, trailing behind like a curious jury. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and kept going. At the bottom, the air grew hotter, heavier. The generator room was a cavern of concrete, pipes and machinery. The massive generator loomed in the shadows, silent and lifeless. Its steel casing was dented in places, its bolts dark with years of grace. Daniel set down his tools and crouched beside it, tracing his hand along the worn surface. "Looks ancient," he muttered to himself. Victoria's voice cut through the silence. Cool and sharp. "That's a 200,000 backup system. Ancient or not, it should be working." Daniel didn't look up. "Machines don't care about price tags, Miss Hale. They care about upkeep." One of her executives snorted under his breath, earning a single icy glance from Victoria that silenced him instantly. Daniel popped the panel open. A tangle of wires, some frayed, others coated in dust, greeted him. He grabbed a rag, wiped it down, then pulled a wrench from his bag. Sparks flickered faintly as he tested connections, his brow furrowed in concentration. The executives whispered among themselves. "There's no way he can fix this. We should have called in the manufacturer. This is a waste of time." Daniel ignored them. His world had narrowed to the machine in front of him. His fingers worked quickly, unfastening bolts, tightening loose joints. He heard the faint echo of Emily's voice in his head. His daughter asking, "Daddy, can we eat out tomorrow?" Just like other families, he had promised her he would try. Failure wasn't an option. Sweat rolled down his temple. He tried one ignition sequence, nothing. The generator stayed dead, humming faintly before sinking back into silence. He cursed under his breath, shook his head, and kept working. Victoria leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her expression unreadable but her eyes locked on him. She had seen men break under pressure before. She had made them break. But this man, he wasn't folding. Not yet. "Time's running," she said softly, her words laced with challenge. Daniel's jaw tightened. He adjusted another set of wires, his hand steady despite the sparks. A loud pop startled the executives, making one of them step back nervously. Daniel barely flinched. "Careful," Victoria said, though there was no fear in her tone, only curiosity. "Careful doesn't fix it," Daniel replied, his voice calm, almost defiant. He dug deeper, reaching into the generator's guts, his knuckles scraped against sharp metal, drawing a thin line of blood. He wiped it on his jeans without pause. His mind raced. Fuel line, starter, ignition relay. He checked them one by one, methodical and precise. For a long moment, nothing worked. The machine groaned but refused to come alive. His chest tightened with the weight of failure pressing in. He thought of Emily upstairs, waiting. He thought of bills stacked on his kitchen counter. He thought of this being his last job, the one he couldn't afford to lose. Then he spotted it. An overlooked breaker hidden behind a corroded panel. A single piece. Small but crucial. He grinned faintly. "There you are." With quick fingers, he reset the breaker, reconnected a wire, and adjusted the fuel intake. His hands were blackened now, nails rimmed with grease. Sweat dripping from his brow. "Come on," he muttered, pressing the ignition again. The generator sputtered, coughed, then died. The executives exhaled in relief, some shaking their heads. "He's done. Told you." But Daniel didn't stop. He slammed the panel closed, adjusted the fuel valve, and tried once more. This time the machine roared. The deep growl filled the concrete room, vibrating through the floor. The generator's lights flickered to life, glowing green. Within seconds, the building above shuddered back into brightness, chandeliers blazing, music resuming in the ballroom like nothing had ever happened. The executives stared, mouths slightly open. Daniel back breathing hard, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His arms trembled from strain, but a satisfied smile flickered across his face. "Don't," he said simply. For the first time all night Victoria allowed a hint of surprise to break through her icy facade. Her lips curved, just barely. Not mockery, not disdain, something else. Admiration. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the concrete. The other executives stepped back, sensing something charged in the air. "You actually did it," she said, her voice softer than before. Though still carrying its usual authority, Daniel stood, wiping his hands on his rag. "I told you I would." Their eyes locked, neither breaking the gaze. Around them, the executives stood in stunned silence. Knowing something had just shifted. Something far bigger than a generator. The ballroom exploded in light. Crystal chandeliers once again bathed the vast room in brilliance. Their reflections scattering across polished marble and glittering champagne flutes. The sudden brightness drew gasps of relief, then applause that started in hesitant bursts, before swelling into a thunderous wave. Guests clapped, laughed nervously, and even cheered as if the man in the basement had pulled them back from disaster itself. And in a way, he had. Daniel wiped his hands on the rag once more. The black grease staining the fabric beyond saving. His chest rose and fell, his body aching from strain, but his expression remained steady, calm, even casual. Like he hadn't just wrestled with an ancient machine under the watchful eyes of doubters. When he pushed open the service door, and stepped back into the ballroom, the sound of applause hit him like a storm. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Investors, employees, servers and guests. All clapping for the man no one had noticed before tonight. Daniel blinked at the noise, uncomfortable in the spotlight. He wasn't used to it. His life was usually about blending into the background, doing the quiet work that no one praised. But now they were all looking at him. Victoria Hale stood at the center of it all, a striking figure in her elegant black dress, her arms no longer crossed but resting easily at her sides. Her face was composed, but her eyes, sharp, focused and alive, were fixed on him. She raised one hand. And the applause died instantly. The room stilled, anticipation thrumming like an invisible current. "He did it," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly. "When others hesitated, when our systems failed. He made sure this night continued." Daniel Ross. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd as she spoke his name, as if suddenly giving weight to the anonymous worker, who had just saved their event. Daniel shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just doing my job," he muttered under his breath. But the room wasn't letting him fade into the background. And neither was Victoria. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk. "And," she added, her eyes never leaving his. "His also earned something else." The words dropped like stones into water, sending shockwaves of whispers rippling across the ballroom. Those who had been in the basement leaned forward eagerly, knowing exactly what she meant. The others pieced it together quickly enough, eyes widening, heads turning between the CEO and the contractor. Daniel's stomach sank. He had hoped, naively, that maybe she would forget her reckless challenge. But Victoria Hale was not a woman who forgot, nor one who backed down. "Ms. Hale," he began, his tone low, almost pleading. But she stepped closer. The crowd parted instinctively, forming a loose circle around them. The music remained silent now, replaced by the heavy hum of expectation. Some guests leaned forward, eager for the scandal. Others covered their mouths, unsure if they were about to witness humiliation or something else entirely. Victoria stopped just a breath away from him. She was smaller than him in stature, but her presence carried a force that made the air feel charged. Her perfume, faint but unmistakable, mingled with the smell of grease and sweat clinging to him. "You fixed the generator," she said simply. "And I keep my word." Daniel shook his head slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I didn't do it for this. I did it because it needed to be done." "I know," she replied, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard from her. "That's why you've earned it." Gasps and murmurs swelled around them. The entire ballroom holding its breath. Daniel felt every eye digging into his bat, waiting. His heart pounded, not from nerves. He'd faced harder trials than this. But from the strangeness of it all. The untouchable CEO, the single dad who fixed things, and this ridiculous, electrifying moment binding them together. For a second, he considered walking away. But then he thought of Emily. His little girl who always said heroes deserve to be noticed. For once in his life, maybe he wasn't meant to disappear into the shadows. Victoria lifted her chin slightly, her eyes unwavering. And then, in front of her stunned team, her powerful clients, and 100 disbelieving witnesses, Victoria Hale leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or mocking. It wasn't for show. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with something none of them had expected: respect. The ballroom went silent. Not even the clink of a glass broke the stillness. It was as if time itself paused, every person frozen, watching the CEO known for ice and steel melt into something warmer, if only for a moment. When she finally pulled back, her expression was unreadable, but her eyes betrayed her. They held a spark of admiration. And something dangerously close to curiosity. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it, but now that it had happened, he knew nothing would be the same. The crowd erupted again. Some clapping, some laughing, some whispering furiously. But all of them knew they had just witnessed a moment that would echo long after the lights dimmed again. The applause thundered again. But this time it wasn't for the lights, or even for the generator. It was for them. For the CEO who never broke her word. And the man who had just reminded an entire room what resilience really looked like. Daniel felt the sound pressing in from all sides. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He lived his life in the shadows, fixing problems quietly, leaving before anyone noticed. His face burned. Though not from embarrassment, but from the surreal reality of what had just happened. Victoria Hale, the woman people called the Ice Queen, had kissed him. And not out of mockery. Not out of pity. She had kissed him because she had made a promise, and because, somehow, in the middle of a blackout and a broken machine, she had begun to see him. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to meet her gaze. Her eyes, sharp as ever, no longer carried only authority. There was curiosity there, respect, and something softer, something she probably didn't want anyone else to notice. The circle of onlookers broke into murmurs. Executives whispered behind their hands, investors raised eyebrows, and servers traded stunned glances. Some laughed nervously as if to dismiss what they had seen, others stared in awe. Victoria raised her hand once more, silencing the room like a conductor quieting an orchestra. She stood tall, back straight, voice firm again. "The event continues," she declared. "Let's not forget why we're here tonight. To celebrate what we've built." Her words were for the crowd, but her eyes lingered on Daniel just a second too long. The music returned, soft at first. Then swelling as if nothing unusual had happened. Waiters hurried to refill glasses, conversations resumed, but the energy of the room was forever changed. People kept stealing glances at the unlikely pair, the powerful CEO and the grease-stained contractor, as though they'd just witnessed a secret fracture in the flawless marble of her image. Daniel shifted awkwardly, wishing the spotlight would move away. He had work boots on, his shirt was torn at the cuff, and he smelled faintly of oil. He didn't belong in this glittering world of designer suits and expensive champagne. His daughter, Emily, was probably upstairs still waiting for him with a little book in hand, asking when Daddy would come back. He turned slightly, ready to slip away into the service corridor. But before he could, Victoria's voice stopped him. "Daniel." It was the first time she had said his name in front of everyone, not as a title or label, but as if she wanted it to carry weight. He turned back, wary. "Yeah." Her expression was unreadable, cool and composed as ever, but her eyes held that spark again, something unguarded. She took a step closer, not enough to draw another scene, but enough that only he could hear her next words. "You reminded me tonight that strength doesn't always wear a suit," she said quietly. "Don't disappear just yet." He blinked, caught off guard by the softness beneath her words. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. For the rest of the evening, though he tried to fade into the background, it was impossible. People approached him. Some clapping him on the back, others asking questions, a few even thanking him personally for saving the night. The executives, once dismissive, now eyed him with something resembling respect. And through it all, Victoria remained composed, directing her staff, charming her clients, embodying the perfect CEO. Yet every so often, when the crowd shifted, their eyes met across the ballroom. Each time, it lingered longer than it should have. When the final speech ended and the last toast was made, Daniel slipped out quietly, heading toward the staff lounge where Emily waited. She was curled up in a chair with her sketchbook, eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Daddy," she exclaimed, jumping into his arms. "You came back." He hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, grounding himself after the whirlwind of the night. "Of course I did, sweetheart, I always will." But as he carried her out of the resort, he couldn't shake the memory of the kiss. The way Victoria had looked at him afterward, as if she'd glimpsed something she hadn't expected. For her part, Victoria stood on the balcony above, watching the guests file out, her glass of wine untouched. She spotted him below, his daughter clinging to his shoulders as they disappeared into the night. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, her chest tightened. She had kept her word. She had tested him. And yet somewhere deep inside, she knew this was no ending. It was only the beginning.